I want to talk to you today about the Pope that we should all be praying for. There's been a lot of talk recently about who should be Pope. Should it be Cardinal Pizzaballa? Should it be Cardinal Mueller? Should it be Cardinal Sarah, Cardinal Erdo, Pietro Parolin, and so on and so forth? Heaven forbid some of the more egregiously awful liberal ones as well. But the front runners seem to be, generally speaking, some of the ones I've just mentioned, including Cardinal Sarah and so forth. A lot of people are saying, man, oh man, I wish we could have Cardinal Burke. I wish we could have Cardinal Mueller. I wish we could have Cardinal Sarah, etc., etc. I'm going to say why I hope that we don't have those men as Pope, although I do think they do a much better job than Pope Francis. But I have some reasons for that, and I'm going to talk about those. Stay tuned. If you're tuning into this show for the first time, this is a traditional Catholic show, hence the name Mere Tradition. If you've tuned in before, you know exactly where I'm coming from. So obviously, I want the traditional Latin Mass to be liberated. I clearly want there to be a return to tradition in the fullest sense. I understand the church is not a museum, and it's not a matter of arbitrarily bringing back certain things that, aren't necessarily part of the deposit of faith or sacred tradition and are maybe kind of customs, and that's fine. But in the sense of the traditional liturgy, the traditional way of forming priests, and so on and so forth, I am all in on that, and I think it should happen. But I don't think that the, generally speaking, kind of tradition-leaning cardinals like the Cardinal Sarahs, Burkes, and Muellers, and so forth of the world, I actually don't think that they would give us tradition again in any sense that would be lasting any more than what we've been given since Pope Benedict, and here's why. So I wrote a book called What Happened to Catholicism, and you can see that book on the screen. And in order to write that book, I had to do a real deep dive into the theology of everything post-conciliar. I read more JP2, Ratzinger, Paul VI, New Catechism stuff, Nouvelle Theology, personal. I read so much stuff that I never would have read for pleasure or for reasons of personal formation. I read more than I ever would have imagined, and I read a ton of Ratzinger, and I read a ton of his confreres and so on and so forth, and the people who are big Ratzingerians. The thing is, that theological stream, this very conservative post-conciliar Vatican II, kind of hermeneutic of continuity, that sort of stream, this is just not something that will bring us tradition in the church again. It just won't. Compared to the sort of cavalier chaos of Paul VI, the kind of messianic carelessness, if that makes sense, that happened under John Paul II, where yes, he was very good on certain moral issues, but liturgically speaking, theologically speaking, maybe cleaned a few things up here and there, but there was a lot of bad stuff that happened, and the sex abuse crisis really exploded under his watch, and that was sad to see in the end. Compared to that, yeah, Cardinal Ratzinger, when he came in with his very German precision and his sort of high and elevated theological language, that seemed like sort of, hey, we're getting, a true blue, old school Catholic theologian again. But here's the thing, my friends. When you look into the history of Cardinal Ratzinger and how he was viewed before 2007, which is a seminal moment because that's when he opened up the floodgates in a good way for the traditional Mass to be celebrated by any priest, whosoever wanted to celebrate it, which was great. But before that time, Cardinal Ratzinger was seen as a liberal. There's a great book called The Great Facade. It's one of the great traditional Catholic works written by Chris Farrar and Thomas Woods. First published in the early 2000s, I think it was 2002, and then republished, second edition, I think 2015. In the first edition, they go over the various things that Cardinal Ratzinger published as the head of the CDF under John Paul II. And it's kind of astounding how much they pick apart all of the things that he said in his time with the CDF and his time as a sort of private theologian beforehand. And it's amazing how liberal it sounds. And that's true. It's very liberal. But then something happens in 2007, and he opens up the floodgates for the traditional Latin Mass to return, and he kind of becomes this traditional Catholic icon. I'm extremely grateful to Pope Benedict for having done that. Traditionalists should be extremely grateful for so many reasons. But you have to understand the reason why the traditional Mass was allowed under Pope Benedict. The reasons might have been a little bit political. Some opine, sort of a ceasefire between, trying to sort of calm things down. But at the same time, his reasoning was that he believed that both of the rites would enrich each other. He believed that the new Mass would enrich the old Mass, and the old Mass would enrich the new Mass, and there could be some sort of synthesis. This is in his work. I think at this point, I think it's absurd to think that the new Mass could ever do anything positive to the old Mass. The new Mass doesn't come from a Catholic place. Sure, a Catholic pope published it and so forth, but it's not based in Catholic tradition. It's not. And anyone who tries to argue it gets decimated by strong Catholic scholars like Dr. Kwasniewski and so forth. There's really no argument for the new Mass as being a good Catholic thing. Yes, it contains a consecration, and a consecration, assuming all things being equal, intention, matter, and form and stuff, yes, something amazing happens, but the liturgy itself is bankrupt and deficient and poses a danger to the faith because over time it imbibes a Protestant mentality and other things. I think we all know that by now. And the reasoning for the allowing of the traditional Mass was because there was this view that there could be this sort of synthesis or compromise or composition between the two rites, and we could have a path forward. That mentality is very Hegelian. It's very modern in its philosophical ideas. It's very modernist. You find this in the writings of Pius X. This is condemned, this notion, in the writings of Pius X, and I talk about that a lot in my book, which you can find underneath, by the way, if you want. And these men, the Cardinal Burkes of the world, the Cardinal Seurats of the world, the Cardinal Muellers of the world, when you do a deep dive into their theological corpus, there are a lot of skeletons in their closets. There's a lot of liberal skeletons in their closets. Granted, as these men have aged and as they have become more traditional in their piety and more outspoken in certain things, we have lots to be happy about, and God be praised for all the wonderful things that they've done. But they view Pope Benedict as like a church father of the new millennium. I think Cardinal Seurat said something like that. I think he said something like he's a church father of the new millennium. No disrespect to Pope Benedict, but if he's a church father, we've got problems. We do not need another Ratzingerian reform of the reform, hermeneutic of continuity, Vatican II just has to be done right, Reverend Novus Ordo guy. We don't need that. It's not going to work in the long run because it's kind of like propping up a corpse. It's like that movie Weekend at Bernie's where they, their friend is dead and they sort of make him have a party with them to have one last shindig with him. It won't last in the long run, and it's inauthentic, even if the intentions are good. What we need is someone, in my opinion, who just isn't part of that mentality. We need someone, in my opinion, with simple faith. Archbishop Lefebvre, when he was trying to find a way forward in the regular sense before the consecrations in 1988, he basically said, I'm asking Rome to have the permission to continue with this experiment of tradition. Archbishop Lefebvre knew that there was going to be no way in the practical or natural sense that we were going to have a Pius XIII who's going to snap his fingers and get rid of all the new stuff and say, boom, we're going back to the pre-conciliar ways. Of course, that's not going to happen overnight. God could work some sort of miracle, fine, but that's just not going to happen, naturally speaking. It just won't. And he knew that, which is why he tried to have a path forward. As an aside, a lot of the guys who say the SSPX has gone soft and the resistance guys, they'll say, oh, the SSPX is soft because they're trying to work within the structures. And Archbishop Lefebvre, near the end of his life, he said there was really no path forward there. Yeah, there was at a time, there was no path forward. That was made obvious. But it was always the case that Archbishop Lefebvre believed that if the old Mass could have her rights and be allowed to flourish, that it would take over. Because it's like that quote that it's attributed to St. Augustine, and I don't really know if he said it, but it's one of those apocryphal quotes, and it's something like, truth is like a lion, you just have to set it free. Something like that. It's true. In 2007, when the traditional Mass was allowed, from that time until Traditionis Custodes, there was a veritable explosion. And the powers that be in Rome, the very Francis types, can pretend it's not that big of a deal, but the reason why they're trying to crush it is because it is a huge deal. And John Paul II believed that the old Mass would go away. If you read his letters allowing the indult Mass under strict supervision, which was very much like Traditionis Custodes, except it was the opposite trajectory. It was forbidden and then opened up, whereas Traditionis Custodes under Pope Francis was taking what was opened up and making it more forbidden. But nonetheless, the rules are actually basically the same that Francis and John Paul II have placed on the old Mass. JP2, the way he talked about the old Mass was that it was something psychological that people were attached to from a former time, and we basically had to give them the opportunity to have that thing they really liked because it was special for them, but over time they would be integrated into the normal mainstream of the church. Well, of course, the opposite happened. Because it is true, the old Mass is like a lion. You let it free and it takes over, and it can't be stopped by anybody, especially if it's hungry. So in 2007, when it was allowed, the SSPX, under the leadership of Bishop Fillet and so forth, rejoiced because they'd been praying for that. We know that if you allow priests to say the old Mass, and you allow the people to attend the old Mass, you will get the old faith again. Because the old faith is the old Mass, and the new Mass is the new religion. Yes, people keep their faith in the new springtime, but it presents a different religion. We don't need another pope, like a Ratzinger type, who, although has an affinity for older things because he thinks they're part of the church's history, we don't need a pope who is committed to the ideals that we just have to Vatican II harder, we just have to hermeneutic of continuity harder, and so forth, because that isn't going to get us where we need to go, because it's not organic, it's not authentic. It's a made-up way of trying to reconcile the disaster of the conciliar revolution with what came before. But you can't reconcile the two. I've become convinced of this in my book, What Happened to Catholicism, which you can find again in the links down below. And what we need is a pope who doesn't come with ideologies or a plan about what sort of theology. We need a man who comes in who just has simple Catholic faith. He loves our Lord Jesus Christ. He believes we should preach Jesus Christ crucified. He doesn't want to concern himself with stupid pet side issues and various hermeneutics and whatever. Like, we need someone who's basically not a professional theologian. You think about it. John Paul II was like an academic, and he was an academic, and he was a thespian, like he was an actor. He was a politician. He was very worldly, and he had all of these notions of like kind of a almost messianic utopian way for the world to be and how the church could do that and stuff. And it was all very disjointed. And yes, there were certain things he said that were great, fine. But if you read the corpus of John Paul II compared to the corpus of the popes before the council, they look like different religions. They just do. Ratzinger was different than John Paul II, but still, he was like a academic. He was a theologian, and he had this sort of way of wanting to frame things in this very modern, kind of personalist, new theology, almost, academic way of understanding Catholicism. And for most people, it's just really confusing. Pope Francis, even though he doesn't have the same pedigree as those men had, he was a Jesuit and therefore was, highly educated and very educated in the modern schools, and was clearly very ideological about how the church ought to run based on his conception of what it's supposed to be. We need a pope who doesn't come in with his ideas saying, I want the church to look like this, or I see the council being implemented like this. Or, this is the reform of the reform of the reform that we need. We need a pope who comes in and says, are the people of the world catechized? Do the people of the world know Jesus Christ? Is the church respected? Are our priests virtuous? Are our people embracing suffering? We need a pope who's just a Catholic. Catholicism is not a religion for academics. It's not a religion for ivory towers and theologians. It's a religion for farmers. And I mean that as a compliment. It's a religion for the grocery store clerk. It's a religion for children. St. Dominic Savio, as a 9 or 10-year-old, however old he was, saying death over sin, understood the Catechism of the Council of Trent better than any modern academic with that simple phrase, death over sin. That's why he's St. Dominic Savio. St. Therese of Lisieux, dying at the age of 20 or 21 or whatever, she understood Catholicism better than all the post-conciliar popes, cardinals, and theologians combined. And they don't even hold a candle because she knew our Lord better than anybody. Holiness was her catechism. We need a pope who comes through with holiness. Holy popes aren't heretics. Holy popes aren't ideologues. Holy popes aren't politicians first. Holy popes don't make backroom deals with their buddies because they have some sort of involvement with a bank. Holy popes preach Jesus Christ crucified. Holy popes are willing to lay down their lives like our Master, Jesus Christ. Holy popes are hopelessly in love with the Virgin Mary. To my mind, there's one candidate that I think, and this is just my gut feeling, I don't know why, but there's one candidate that I think would do a very good job. And I don't have perfect reasons for this, but there's something about Cardinal Pizzaballa that gets my spidey senses tingling. And I think it's because he's been in the Holy Land for so long. He's been steeped in traditional worship. He's seen what it means to be a Christian who lays down his life for his Lord. He's seen the extent of modern atheistic politicking with the whole Zionist movement. And I think he understands what's at stake. And I hope that he's elected. Now, if he's no good, that's going to be a long 30 years. But for some reason, I don't know. I have a good feeling about him. Whoever becomes pope, pray for a holy pope. Don't worry about their statements about, how did they implement this thing or what are their statements on the environment or whatever. Just pray for a holy pope. If the pope is truly holy, and that's one thing I will say about Pope Benedict. Everyone who knew him said that he really was a man who was holy. And I believe them because as he aged and he was seeking holiness, he opened the doors up more and more to tradition. And that was very important to him. I think his reasoning was flawed and I think it was ultimately unsuccessful. Nonetheless, there's a reason why he was so open to tradition for others, at least, because I do think he was seeking holiness. And when you seek holiness, you let your guards down about sort of worldly concerns and you just want the supernatural. And I think that Cardinal Pizzaballa is a man that might fit that bill. He's younger than the rest of them, which is good and bad. But the good thing is that he's been in the Holy Land for so long. He's been a Franciscan for so long. He's not part of the boys' club from Europe or whatever. He's just it seems like an old school Italian Catholic, and I think that's something we could all use. The last Italian pope we had was Paul VI, and I think it's time to go back. Not that Paul VI was very good, but anyway. Those are my random thoughts. If you want to hear more of my random thoughts, which I don't know why you would, check the link in the description to sign up for the Substack. Lots of great stuff going on there. I just released a podcast for premium subscribers on the Opus Day, and it's kind of controversial, which is why it's over there. and the link to sign up for the Substack is underneath. All right. God bless you all, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.